people share their butterfly effects that ended up serious later on. Not exactly chaos, but it had a big impact. After I graduated college, before I could land a full-time job, I was doing temp work. I'd just finished a week-long temp assignment as a receptionist at an office. It was Friday, but they called me and asked if I could come back for one more day since their receptionist was still out. I did, thinking nothing of it. Turns out that my husband was starting his first day at the company working help desk, and his first ticket was to install a new printer at the receptionist's desk. If I hadn't agreed to one more day of work, I never would have met him. That's some Jim and Pam level stuff right there. This is so wholesome, I'm literally rereading it and smiling. Things like this really fill me with joy and give me hope. The fact that things like this actually happen is so pure and beautiful. I like this one. This is the first wholesome one I've read. Broke a glass and spilled juice all over the floor when I was 8. We are at our uncle's house. It got under of a quite heavy cabinet. It was sticky and my father moved the cabinet a little so my uncle's wife can clean it. Behind the cabinet, there was a small box and inside that small box, a cell phone. So that's how my uncle's wife found out he had a second phone and was cheating for a long time. It was a whole thing. They ended up getting a divorce. I mean, for a story that involves OJ and an affair, it could have ended a lot worse. That's awesome. Fate wanted her to know and used you as its conduit. I always think about little accidents and mechanical failures that'll make someone poke around when I'm picking a spot to stash things. Wow, see, this is why everybody freaks out over spilled milk. Kind of a long story, so I'll sum it up. When I was in high school I had to dig up a dead tree in our yard. I lazily didn't fill in the hole like my dad requested because I was exhausted after moving everything, left it for a couple days, and my mom ended up breaking her ankle after taking a nasty fall from that same hole. She went to the hospital where they did surgery on her ankle and she caught gangrene. No big deal, it was treatable at first. They did some minor amputations and gave antibiotics. Nothing they gave her did anything but slow it down. So when they finally found one that worked well for her, what they didn't realize is that in a week's time she would have several heart failures a day because of it, and eventually it got to the point we had to let her go. TLDR, I didn't fill in a hole and my mom died. Not a bad kind of chaos, but showing up for a final exam at the wrong time lead to a crap load of cascading events that result in me meeting my wife and having a successful life. I was on academic probation my junior year of college because I liked partying more than studying, and refused to learn my lesson. I pulled all-nighters for my final exams, and needed a 2.0 or better to stay in school. Part of being sleep-deprived meant that I mixed up the times of my last exam. It was at noon, but I thought it was 5 p.m., so I show up to a now darkened building, freaking out. I was scrolling through my contacts hoping to call anyone I knew from the class when I bumped into my professor, knocking the stuff out of his bands. He was packing up the last load of his things, as he was heading back home to Canada for the winter break, and had me marked as a 0. I needed a 75% or better on his final to stay in school. He gave me 20 minutes to take this test, which I was able to get a B on, which let me stay in school, graduate, get a professional job, after a year of min-wage bullcrap, move to a city with my friend where I met my wife. If I was literally 1 minute later rounding that corner in that lecture hall 9 years ago, I wouldn't have had the life I have now. I just moved back into my apartment after a longish displacement and several $1,000s of emergency hazmat cleanup and home repair. It all took place because I decided to make a neat little impulse purchase. I work at an antique store and collect medical antiques. On one of my shifts several weeks back I saw an antique blood pressure gauge and associated kit with cuff and tubing for super cheap, like $20. I almost didn't buy it because I didn't have anywhere to put it yet, as I needed, and still need, a new shelf, but I bought it anyway. Since I didn't have anywhere else to put it, I kept setting it, still in the bag, on the floor, or on various horizontal surfaces, moving it as needed. Somewhere along the lines, the gauge itself broke, spilling the equivalent of several dozen mercury thermometers in my apartment. I still don't know when exactly the leak started, but best case scenario I was exposed to a relatively high amount of mercury in a small indoor space for several days, at worst a couple weeks. When I finally discovered the leak and the mercury, it turned my life upside down. A state hazmat team was called and then I had to have my apartment professionally cleaned by an emergency spill crew designed for, and priced for, industrial spills. Most of those crews won't even take on residential cases. There are shockingly few resources for people who spill hazardous chemicals at home to get safe, effective cleanup. My insurance also wouldn't touch the incident, so it cost several $1,000s out of pocket for the cleanup, and then my landlord mandated an additional several $100s worth of home repair in response to the damage the spill cleanup crew was forced to do when removing the mercury from hard to clean spots. I evacuated on August 6 and moved back in for good 2 days ago, on August 25. All of this would have been prevented if I had just gone with my initial "nah, I don't need this thing yet, I'll wait until I have a proper shelf for it," and left the gauge at the shop. ETA that I haven't experienced any symptoms of mercury poisoning. Huge relief. Maybe not trivial, but it did cause a downhill chain of events. About 10 years ago during a holiday weekend, we discovered a bedroom window on our home had been shattered. By Monday afternoon, a bunch of neighborhood kids had already come by to tell me who did it. Our house was fairly well known as a safe space, so kids would often come by when locked out, needed food, cleaned up after crashing a bike, etc. It was a kid in my child's class. He knew it was our house and it was targeted because he didn't like my kid. I worked with local law enforcement to just have the window replacement paid for. It was a fairly new window, double paned, with environmental film. It wasn't cheap. I didn't want any further trouble for the kid, hoping it would just be a learning experience and he would make better decisions in the future. He came by with half the amount in cash, and said he would return the next day with the remainder. Didn't happen, but I waited. A month later, an officer called me to verify the window was paid for, and had the boy and his grandma, his guardian, in the room. Child had told them both he paid it all but actually kept half. He came home from school shortly after to discover his grandma had sold some of his game systems to cover what he stole / pay off the window. Child goes off the deep end and beats the crap out of her. She surrendered guardianship and his parents still didn't want him, so he ended up in a group home. He was arrested for vandalizing our house and it took years to come to an end. I know it isn't my fault, but I still feel badly that he ultimately ended up in an orphanage after breaking our window. It is very not your fault, that's all on the kid. He had plenty of chances to make things right. He could have not broken the window out of dislike for your child, could have not kept half the money, could have come clean to his grandmother, or could have not beaten up his own grandmother. This kid had every opportunity to not end up in an orphanage. The fact that the neighborhood kids see your house as a safe space and were willing to point fingers at the culprit speaks volumes about your character, as does the guilt you feel. We all want the best for kids, especially ones with problems. But sometimes they make their choices and we can only hope they'll be put in a position to grow and learn from their mistakes.